1963 was a watershed moment for the Black freedom struggle, and it was also a watershed moment in United States history. It was a year in which Medgar Evers was assassinated. It was the year in which the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing took place. It took the lives of 4 innocent young girls. It was also the same year, in November of that year, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So there was a lot going on here at this particular point. But this was also the height of the civil rights movement, and we are here to commemorate the 50th anniversary of when children marched. Now, one thing that happens with the civil rights narrative is that children in Birmingham often get the most attention. But today we want to pay tribute to those here in Jackson, Mississippi, as you saw Dr. Gene Young, who was a student here at Jackson State University. And we pay tribute to him. But we also want to pay tribute to those who are here to share their stories of when they were involved in the movement in May and June of 1963. So if you would join me in welcoming to the panel one of our own Jackson State English instructor, Ms. Frankie Adams Johnson, who served as the chairwoman of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. And in the research that I did when I was working on my doctoral degree, Ms. Johnson served as the inspiration for my research, and she played a very integral role in helping me to pull everything together on why children were so instrumental in this movement. And also joining Ms. Johnson on this panel, we have Reverend Shirley Harrington Watson, who was also one of the marching children here in Jackson. So if you would join me in welcoming Ms. Frankie Adams Johnson and Reverend Shirley Harrington Watson. Now, as a part of this particular panel, what we will have from each of these individuals is for them to share their experiences. And let me also add this, because I'll be remiss if I didn't say this. In April of this year, the COFO Civil Rights Education Center worked alongside with Jed Oppenheim, who's in our audience this evening, with the Southern Poverty Law Center, as well as Ms. Johnson and her students from the Department of English and Modern Foreign Languages. And we wanted to do something to recognize those who were involved in Jackson, Mississippi during the Children's Crusade, or the Children's Campaign here in the capital city. So this is something that we are extremely proud of, and I know that Ms. Johnson is proud of, so I know some of her students are here. And the students took great pride, and they enjoyed the project that she had them working on. But what we will hear from these two persons is that children between the ages of 7 and 18 exhibited a wisdom that was far beyond their years, but they also exhibited tremendous bravery, and at the same time they demonstrated that they too wanted to be a part of the movement, a movement that a 4-year-old in Birmingham, Alabama said, "I'm marching for my freedom." So again, Ms. Johnson and Reverend Harrington.
I'd like to take you back to 1963. It was about March. I was 13 years old. And one of the things that I can remember was standing on my tiptoes at Mount Ham Baptist Church, not too far from here, trying to see this man. He spoke with a voice of authority. His demeanor was so sure. His words were eloquent. And his tenacity was above anything I had ever seen. There were people in every corner of the building. There were other children. I was one of the youngest. But as he began to tell us what economic empowerment would mean, what voter registration would mean, what having schools that were not desegregated or segregated, but were open to all. I couldn't believe it. And what was so amazing was he was a member of our neighborhood. He lived in Shady Oak. He and my father were members of the same lodge right across the street. He had little children too. And yet there was something so magical about this person. And his name was Medgar Evers. He soon became my hero. He became a role model. I aspired to speak like him. I wanted to have the same kind of dedication and vision that he had. And so, in just a few hours, I was a convert to the Jackson Civil Rights Movement. That trail of meetings every week from one church to another would educate us, inspire us, and give us his vision. A vision of no more discrimination, no more separate schools, no more going downtown Jackson and not being able to try on clothes, no more colored water, no more colored restrooms. And I could see the vision at 13. My book is entitled Grown at 13. And I capture in that book, what does it mean to have a role model? What does it mean to be a child so young and yet propelled into adulthood? I mean, literally, I grew up overnight. I never learned how to skate. There were no swimming pools for me to learn how to swim. I never played hopscotch. But for some reason, I wanted to pass out signs. I wanted to be a part of demonstrations. I wanted to be in strategy meetings. I was the youngest one that would go to the strategy sessions. I would take notes with my mother, who was the secretary of every organization, the Parent Teachers Association and the NAACP. And in that 13th year of my life, in a very few months, my dreams would just literally be shattered. That's my introduction, and I will continue as Frank gives her introduction.
Good afternoon. My name is Renee Johnson. I'm a part-time now, a retired here, and some of the students know me as being a professor here, and so I am a retiree here. First of all, before I start to talk about me, I'd like to apologize for one of our panelists, Reverend Alfonso Lewis. He asked me to apologize to all of you, and I would love to have him here because I will speak on who he is and how we all kind of became part of this young people's movement that is going on here in Jackson, Mississippi. Last semester, I had my students, as Dr. Chamberlain said, to actually do a research project on that, and actually it was a very interesting research project. We spent a lot of time at the COFO building, and which is COFO meaning the Congress of, let me get it together, Council of Federated Organizations. So during the 60s, there were doing here in Jackson, there were many people that was involved in what was known as the Civil Rights Movement, and those many people belonged to various organizations, organizations such as the NAACP, such as CORE, the Congress of Racial Equalities, and I'm saying this to all you young people because I know that many of you have heard of this thing called the Civil Rights Movement, and then many of you come to this place to hear us talk about this thing called the Civil Rights Movement. But many of you come because your teachers say you should come, and hopefully that with your coming that you will learn something about this movement and how closely connected you are in terms of location. Right here on Lynch Street, we have a very rich center called the COFO Center, which is the Council of Federated Organizations. And would some of you write that down so you can go back and tell your teacher that you did learn something other than who was there, and learn something that they said. I'm telling you about the center because I would like to encourage you all as young people here, as students here, to become aware of things that are going on, that we try to talk about these things that happened during our time when we were students just like you, probably also being asked to go to hear people speak about issues that were going on. And these things are very, very important in the sense that some of the things that was going on, some of the reasons that we march and that we protest, some of those reasons are still very real today. And so I hopefully that the COFO Center is right down. How many of you know where Lynch Street is? Lynch Street. Okay, good. You know where Lynch Street is. How many of you know where the COFO Center is? Oh, good. Then hopefully more of you will get to know where it is, because some of the stuff that we talk about here, some of the stuff that you'd be found pictures and people and places and organizations, and it's very, very rich information for you. So I'll talk to you a little bit about me. Reverend Harrington talked about being young and what was the motivation that attracted many of us young people into this big thing that was going on here, and the big thing that was going on in the nation, particularly in southern states. Segregation was very, very real, and segregation meaning that people were separate. We didn't have the same privilege that many of you have to go to school wherever you want to sit wherever you want to eat wherever you want to. And so those things we were not privileged to. And because we were not privileged to those things, I, as a young person, my motivation really came out of curiosity, pretty much. Why? A question of why was it that certain people were not allowed, particularly black people, were not allowed to enjoy some of the pleasures that white people enjoyed. So out of that curiosity, it really started me to raising the questions, and out of raising questions, particularly in 1963, lots of things was going on here in Jackson. A lot of things was going on here in Jackson. A lot of things was going on here in Mississippi prior to 63. And in 61, a lot of people came down to Mississippi, what we call the Freedom Riders, and they began to come to Jackson, okay? And so that began to make news here and headlines here, and our schools began to change a little bit. I was, in 1963, I was a sophomore going into my junior year of high school, and during that time, our curriculum began to include words that was not that was not a part of my vocabulary, that was not to my familiarity. And one of those words happened to be communism. And out of that, asking that question, what does that word mean? And I asked that question to a person who was my age, who was what was also probably way ahead of the rest of us in knowing things. And so he began to explain to me the things that was happening in Mississippi and how those things affected us. And from asking that one question, and I'm saying that to you because asking a question can lead you to a broader, can open doors to many different things. And so in asking that question, I began to, Reverend Harrington and I are from the same community. We're from a community called Vernon Bishop. And in that community, we very proudly can say that in that community, we had people that was actively involved in making a difference, making changes. One of those persons, as she has mentioned, is Meg Evans, and I'm going to talk more about him. But prior to meeting Meg Evans, I had right in my church a young woman. That's why Reverend Lewis is hopefully would be here to talk about this woman. Her name was Carolina Lewis, and she was a member of our church. I'm still a member of that church, SK Chapel in Berdition. Many people in that church were very much involved in this thing called freedom fighting, and which was another new word for me. I was curious about that word, freedom. And from being involved in this community, in this church that was pretty actively involved in the community, and holding us accountable and responsible for making a difference. Also, those people in that church began to teach us about fighting for freedom, and many of those people knew Medgar Evers, and one of those persons happened to be Carolina Lewis. She was a student at Tougaloo College, and Tougaloo College students were very, very active. Tougaloo College students were actively involved in desegregated libraries and desegregated lunch counters. So in 1963, a group of those students, Carolina Lewis, I have a lot of stuff going on today, so I'm going to ask Reverend Harris.
It was about 7 students that actually went to the first round of sit-ins at the Walgreens store. Those first students had a plan that was organized by Medgar Evers that if those students were arrested, then another 7 students would take their place. If those students were taken out, another 7 students would take their place. And this went on for about an hour. But the first students, Carolina being one of them, and Moody was another, Annie Moody was another, and Brett.
Sam, not Sam was not at the lunch counter.
But anyway,
so some of the names of them kind of fell in, and they went to pick up.
They put food in their hair, they spat on them, and then they arrested them. And this made national news. This was one of the first times that Jackson, or the civil rights movement, had been put on national news, and it was very negative.
And Carolina Lewis was, as I said, was one of those students. I've gotten stuck with the names of all the students. I have a lot of stuff going on here, so I might mention all the names, but I want to talk particularly about Carolina Lewis and how she, being one of those students, was also a member of our community, because it's important that we see how young people are connected, and how you are, as young people, are connected, and how connections leads us to different places. And Carolina Lewis, being one of those students, was sent at the Woolworth that day. And as Reverend Harrington said, those students were beaten up on, they were spat on, they were covered with ketchup and food, and all kinds of terrible things happened. And with those terrible things happening, it did not discourage us to not want to be involved. Matter of fact, it was that particular incident was the catalyst that gave rise to the Young People's March. That happened on May 28th. On May 31st, young people from 3 black high schools here in Jackson, Mississippi, we went to segregated schools. There were Brinkley, there was Lanier, and there was Jim Hill. Young people from all of those schools got together, and those marches were encouraged and inspired by a man called Medgar Evers, who was very instrumental in helping mobilize and organizing young people to make a difference. And so on that day, on May 31st, many of us walked out of our high schools, and I don't know if you saw a bit of that on the film. We walked out of our high schools, and and I can speak for Brinkley in terms of just how that went. We left our high schools and we marched, had gotten on about a quarter of a mile from the school before we were arrested and put in, and it was many students, so the arrest meant that there was not enough paddy wagons to put all the students in. And so we were put in garbage cans, and we were taken to the fairground. Now the fair is very ironic that we're talking about this and the fair starts today. The fairground, how many of you been to the Mississippi State Fair?
How many of you know where the fairgrounds are?
You do know what the fairgrounds are. Well, during that time, there, I don't know what's happening now. Let me finish this a bit. What's going on now in terms of whether that you have places now where they hold the livestock. I don't know if that still happens, but back in those days, there were compounds where they kept the livestock, you know, the cows and the horses and all of that. Those places was cleared, and we became the living livestock, so that when we were taken off from when we were arrested, we were put in garbage trucks and taken to the fairground, and we were detained there and held there. And even if you were not a organized part of the march, that first night that we were at the fairground, that first day at the fairground, many young people who were not even were not organized participants in March ended up there at the fairground. And Medgar Evers likened that fairground to a concentration camp. How many of you know what a concentration camp is? So we see a few hands, we see some hands go up. So we were taken in and treated like prisoners in a concentration camp, and so that was the first march that we did, and what followed there.
Before you go to another march, let me talk about the same one. We both went to Brinkley High School. Did you know where Brinkley High School was? Does anybody know anything about the history? With desegregation, we lost Brinkley High School in the consolidation of schools. Brinkley Middle School on Livingston Road was a junior-senior high school. I was 7th grade, and you were 10th grade, Frankie? Were you 10th grade? And I was part of the youth council. We had met, and I brought some things. I know if you like me, visuals are really good. One of the organizers for the youth council was the president of the North Jackson Youth Council, and his name was Cleveland Donald. Cleveland died just a few years ago. One of the other things about Cleveland is that he was one of the first graduates of Ole Miss. So he was also a Tougaloo graduate. So we as students were given a time that we were to all move out of the school. Now, were you put in a paddy wagon or the garbage trucks?
Okay, paddy wagon.
I was put in the paddy wagon too. People that were put in the paddy wagon were driven to downtown, and we went under the jail. And that's how the jail is right now. If you decide you want to take a tour, I'm sure they would give you a tour of it. You drive under, and the paddy wagon sits under until you are processed. And the difference for us was, not only did we sit in the paddy wagon, but they turned the heat on us and locked the doors. The good part was that we had been to Freedom School and we learned how to breathe. And we were doing rotation breathing and trying to survive. One of the stories that I always tell when I lecture is that my clothes were made out of polyester. Anybody knows what polyester is? What kind of material it is? Huh? It has a plastic compound to it, right? And so when it got extremely hot, it actually stuck to my skin. And so I pulled my clothes away from me and had the imprint of the clothes that I had on. That's just how hot we had gotten in that paddy wagon. And I just wanted to interject that. So from the 3 schools, we call him Jughead, that was on the film. He came from West Jackson School. And we were to converge on downtown, but we didn't make it there. They stopped us within blocks from each school, and they put us in the fairground. There were, I say, thousands of us. They said it was 1,500. And I brought an article that talked about Medgar Evers' death, which would be only a few days later. And those of us that were in leadership stayed the longest. Some of the children started getting out the next day, but it was actually Friday, Saturday, Sunday night when my parents finally convinced me that I needed to go home. And my father tells the story better than I could ever say it. He always talks about it. It was one time that I thought you would never shut your mouth up. They wanted us to sign an agreement that we would never march again. And I then had been a teacher in Freedom School at 13. And I taught the Mississippi Constitution and the United States Constitution. So I started quoting the Constitution of the United States. I said, oh no, I will not give up my rights as a free citizen of the United States and blah, 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 blah. And my father said he was just sitting there saying, oh Lord, please let her be quiet, please let her be quiet. It was a propelling time. If I had to do a comparison of what can you do, how can you be today, I would tell you to be just like I was in '63. Find something that you can get inspired with. Find somebody that is talking something, acting a certain way, giving some instructions, guiding people, directing people, and catch on to that vision. That's the reason I wanted to start that way, and I know it's very unfair to you because you're saying, who are you? Where you come from? What have you been doing in the last 50 years? And we're going to talk about that, but I wanted to just kind of interject that right at that point. And I know we were not given an organizational structure, and I don't even know how long we're supposed to be here to speak.
But I want to open it up for questions for the audience.
Just before we open it up for questions, to kind of give you a little feel of, I think our topic is the Children's Crusade, and that's an interesting topic, the Children's Crusade, because what does it mean to be a crusader? And we were, I guess at your young tender age, and a little younger, some of us were, probably didn't know we were crusaders, but we were, as Dr. Jenkins said at the beginning, that much is heard of the civil rights movement, much is heard about the Alabama children marching. Mississippi, the children marching here in Mississippi has probably been underplayed like Mississippi gets a lot of underplay about many things. We've known for the worst of everything, but some of the things that the Children Crusade, one of the things that happened in the struggle is that many people are involved in the struggle. And so we hear about great leaders, we hear about so most of you probably heard about Martin Luther King. Well, how many of you heard of Martin Luther King? Okay. How many of you heard of Martin Luther King? Let me see. How many hands? How many of you heard of Medgar Evers? Okay, good. So then you have heard of Medgar Evers. But what often happens is that when you're hearing about heroes and people who make a difference is that oftentimes we don't see ourselves as young people being able to make a difference, and we think that making a difference means that we have to do something really, really great. Well, doing something really, really great is to take a stand on something, and taking a stand, and usually in a war, it's young people who are the foot soldiers, and the foot soldiers are very, very important people, because the foot soldiers open the doors for the great folks to step out, okay? I think you can kind of understand where I'm going with that. So that, in trying to wrap this up, much of the Young People's Crusade, it started with the children marching here, but it did not end there. So just that those small things that we did, going to March, we marched, all that summer '63 we marched. As a matter of fact, when it was time for us to go back to school, my first day of school, I was at the courthouse on my first day of school, feeling kind of scared too, because I didn't know what was going to happen to me, because I did not know if I was going to be put in jail and I would not go to school. I was young, and that's the way I felt. But even with a lot of the scary things that went on, there was a lot of brutal things that happened. And 1963 is a very important year because in 1863, Medgar Evers was killed shortly after we began to march. And then once Medgar Evers was killed, the day that Medgar Evers was killed, we took to the street, okay? And the next day after we marched to the street, and so it was a long summer of marches. But then many of us went from marching in the children march to doing other things, becoming a part of SNCC. I went off to New York and got involved in more urban kinds of politics. So I say all of this to you as young people. Don't think it has to be something grandiose that you have to do to make a difference. You can make a difference right now, today, by one, getting informed, learning more about your surroundings right here, because right here at JSU campus, students made a difference right here at JSU campus. There are monuments for two students who were killed here on this campus for making a difference. So I don't want to paint the bounds and say, well, if you step out here and do something, you're going to get killed. Well, those things might very well happen, but there are other wonderful things happen for that. Because someone marched, because someone died, it gave you the freedom to go to school where you wanted to. It gave you the freedom to eat wherever you wanted to. And so there is a lot of things that you can do to make a difference. And as Harrington said, we did not have a form of presentation here in terms of the format of it. But what I do want to yield now, and I know many of you probably having to change classes and go off to class, but hopefully to open it up so that
before you open it up,
we have said.
Frankie, before you open it up, let me just tell you who I am, because I think it would be unfair for any of you to leave here not knowing what my background has done to help me be the person that I am. We learned how to do public speaking. I was one of the young speakers in mass meetings, and because of that, I have gone on to work in the federal government. In fact, in 1993, I became a Clinton appointee and moved to Washington, D.C. And I served for 2 terms at the Department of Veteran Affairs as Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Human Resources. After I finished those 8 years, because I had my own tenacity based on having been trained as a civil rights worker and understanding that I was unemployed and I wanted to do some other things, I took the civil service test and actually applied for a job and went on to become the National Program Manager for the Department of Agriculture for African American Affairs. And from that job, in the last 4 years, I have been given a position of National Events and Exhibits Coordinator for the entire nation for USDA, meaning that I am over monitoring what events, more than 5,000 events that happen not only in the United States, but in 37 other countries, and a staff of 50 people that work under my supervision. And I'm getting ready to retire from that position. But more important, 5 years ago, I accepted my call to the ministry based on belief that God has not brought me this far to leave me, and that all that I have done has been in line with the mission of Christianity, to see about the poor, to take care of the sick, to look after the widows, and to deal with those who are in prison, to be their spokespersons. And all of that is within the mission of the church. So I'm coming home after 21 years in Washington, D.C., and having traveled around the world and been a part of a lot of settings that I never thought I would be a part of. Not a child born in Yazoo County, Mississippi, raised in Jackson, Mississippi, in Shady Oak, educated in Jackson Public Schools, attended Cade Chapel with Dr. Johnson, and being a part of a congregation that actually inspired young people, having 2 parents that allowed me to dream, having a community that encouraged me and gave me a place for a platform. So it is so important for you to understand that what we did as teenagers propelled our lives, gave us the understanding that we are not just here. We have responsibilities and obligations, and they start when we are very young.
So if you all would join me in thanking our panelists. And the one thing I would like to make note of with both of these women is, of course, they're the inspiration for the young people who you will hear from at 2:30, and some of them have already arrived. But we want to be able to open the floor up to questions. So are there any questions for our panelists on their participation in the 1963 March?
I have several of my students that have questions.
Hello, my name is Alicia Carr. I'm in the conference class. Miss Reverend Watson, I was listening to you talk about you were a teacher in freedom school at the age of 13. Is that correct? Did I say it right?
Was I in the movement at 13?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, when you went out to Washington D.C., you was also at the age of 13, correct?
Say that again.
How old were you when you went to Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1993. I was 43.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
My name is Jennifer. I'm in Wilson class. I want to know, like, how do you feel today that you accomplished something in the world?
Who are you directing the question to?
Well,
How do you,
like, how do you feel that you have accomplished what you did?
I actually feel that the being involved is the making of who I am, and I feel real good about who I am. I feel that had I had the experience that I had, I might probably be silently sitting by, not really caring much about what happened to young people like you. There's so many people who have not done a whole lot to contribute to the well-being of Edison, so we have little caring. But those experiences helped me to be more sensitive and more caring about the quality education of young people like you, be more caring about people who do not have homes to sleep in, to be more caring about young children who get raped every day. So it really did make me the person. I mean, those kind of experiences molded me to be very, very caring about people.
I feel like when I used to do, and I brought some of these are like pamphlets we used to go and hand out. And at 13, 14 years old, people would say, you don't know what you're doing. Where are your mom and dad? You need to go home. You need to stop passing out all this stuff. You all need to stop being agitators. These were people right here in Jackson. Many of them were, I'd say they were afraid. They didn't want to understand that we were true agents of change. And what it helped me to do is get a thicker skin. That's one thing. I got past fear. I got past being intimidated by what someone else thought about what I was doing, because I had strong character and strong convictions. And because of that, that same character, those same techniques of speaking what I know to be right, working towards projects and issues that are sometimes not favorable, it has helped propel me to be the person that I am. And I really I'm a PTSD sufferer. Does anybody know what that means? Post-traumatic stress disorder. And because I was in the civil rights war. And as a PTSD sufferer, there can be anything that triggers you just like that. And you don't sometimes even know it, But when it starts to happen, you have to just catch yourself. And even sometimes I've had to go to counseling because of it. And the reason is because you're not treated well, and it traumatizes you. And I've marched and I've been arrested so many times until I had all this stuff in me. I had anger in me. But what I've been able to do is channel all of that energy, channel the madness and the disgust and the disappointments, and I moved it to energy where I'm going to excel. I am going to achieve. I'm going to school. I'm getting my master's degree. I am going to be what I want to be. I'm not going to let somebody label me and put me in a place. So I thank God for the civil rights movement, because it made me not only a strong woman, but it made me an American that is proud to be a part of the change of history that we did.
We have 3 more questions. Let's do the band here.
You have 2
We have one right here too.
And then there's a young lady there. Okay, well, yeah, we have a bunch of questions. Okay.
Hi, my name is Samuel Durr, and my question is, do you see a change in use in engagement in your days and today?
We can't hear you, dear.
Do you see a change in use engagement in your day and today?
Quite a bit. I guess that's why I spoke directly to the youth, because today's youth, I think maybe, I don't know what has happened. We talk about it often, but that there seem to be the less concern, and I don't know if that happened, because much happened in terms of what we did. We opened doors. But young people now seem to, and that's just my opinion, you asked in terms of what the young people today, it's not a criticism, but it's an observation that young people today, whether we, perhaps maybe could be that oftentimes you're not as exposed. Some things, what I guess, because things were, for us, there were so many things that were very real for us, like segregation was a very real thing for us. Racial hate was a very real thing for us. So there was those things that was real clear for us that it was important that we get involved. It seems that today that those things that we fought for, and I think maybe that maybe because young people, you have your issues and perhaps your issues don't look like our issues look, you know. But hopefully that you will be able to identify issues that you're concerned with, and issues that affect you. There's some things that are going on right now today, as we speak. One very important thing going on today, as we speak. There's a thing that's going on that did you know that the federal government is to shut down? Do you know that is something that affects you? And do you know why the federal government shut down? Because of some of those very same things that was happening back then, that same thing when we talk about ism and racial superiority. Part of why the federal government is shut down today is because that very same thing is still very real today. You still have people in the government today who feel very, very superior, who feel that poor people should not have proper health care. And those things affect people like you. Young people like you are affected by that. Who feels that young people like you should even have a quality education? Those things are very, very real today. And so I so passionately speak to you about learning what it was that young people fought for in 1963 and back in the 60s, and how those things, how much of those things have changed, how much of those things are very real, how those things look for you.
I'd like to just respond to your question, because I think that there is a large element of young people who are just as passionate. I come across them in organizations like the NAACP, ACSO. Do you have any of you, are you familiar with ACSO? Academic, Cultural, Technological, Social, Olympia, where these young people compete. In organizations like 4-H, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people who have gone through that leadership training in the church, you on campuses, you are not going to make the evening news because you're not robbing, killing, or stabbing anybody, right? You understand what I mean? And where there may not be demonstrations where you see young people out front, I think you are protesting in a silent way every day just by getting up and struggling and doing the things that you do. So I look at it, and I'm a Pisces, I always see things half full. And where there may not have be a strong movement for you to galvanize behind, NAACP has over 1,500 youth and college divisions. National Urban League have what they call New Lights, and there are thousands of young people learning how to be entrepreneurs around the country. And those are just a few. Boy Scouts of America, all of these different organizations are very positive, role-building, galvanizing organizations. So I see there is some difference in activism, but I also see that there are tons of young people doing very positive, very wonderful things with their lives.
We have two more questions. Okay, one up here, one down across the front, and a final question towards the center.
Hello, my name is Irene. I was wondering, well, my question is for the both of you, I guess. Are there any local issues or press issues that you have been involved in, and if so, what are they?
Well, yes, there are always local issues in this, and all politics are local. And I brought some memorabilia. In 1981 and 31, I ran for city commissioner here in Jackson. And then after not winning the election, I won the party primary. And the significance of winning a party primary, I went into the general election, I ran against 9 white men. And then I went into that general election, I lost to a white man. And then we were able to, under a lawsuit, Kirksey had filed a lawsuit. And that lawsuit was won an out-of-court settlement where we changed the form of government to a ward system. So you're looking at the person who is directly responsible for having been the instrument used in that case, because under the Voting Rights Act, if you cannot win at large, that is the basis of declaring that you have a discriminatory system that would not allow a certain part of the population to be elected. And now, right now in Jackson, there are several areas of issues that are so much impacting this community. If you looked at the housing issues in Jackson right now, there are just tons of communities that you need to be active and going to the Jackson Planning Board and saying, why do we have so much vacant property? How come we can't reduce some of these properties and make teen centers? Or why can't we have learning centers in certain areas, or global think tank buildings established? Or why can't we come up with an innovative program where people who are marginalized in their employment can get a house that is already owned by the city that is sitting vacant? So that's just one example of a pressing issue right here that you could take on as young people.
Hi, I was just interested in knowing what were some of the techniques that you taught when you were 13?
When we were teaching Freedom School, one of the things that was taught was nonviolent acceptance. And that's a hard one, because if you have a very strong spirit, I mean, I was one of those flipping kids. You say something to me and I just wanted to right back at you. Then they actually would sit us down, and people would yell at us, and they would teach us how to control ourselves. And that became so important when I was one of the people that desegregated Provine High School in 1966. I took so much stuff on a daily basis, I couldn't believe it myself when people spit on me and threw stuff through my hair and called me out of my name. So one of the techniques was, how do you control yourself? How do you actually stay calm, stay focused? How do you stay on target with who you are, what is your purpose, what are you in here for, and what is the bigger picture, because it's always about a bigger picture when you're in a demonstration. It's not about you. So if you went there for a purpose and there was a group of you there, you had to stay on target, stay in place, do what you were assigned to do, knowing what the outcome may be was that you were going to be arrested.
Okay, and we would have one last question. And Ms. Johnson and Reverend Harrington, there are students who have additional questions. So after the panel is over, if you all would send greetings to those. But one last question.
Yeah, speak up.
My name is Jordan Rogers, and my teacher is in Hawkins. And I was wondering, y'all said y'all was
Hold your mic up a little closer.
in the paddy wagon.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, did y'all think that y'all was going to survive in the heat?
Do you think what?
Did y'all think that y'all was going to survive in all the heat?
Was it,
Did you think that you were going to survive in the paddy wagon when you were actually in there, based on the current situation that was going on inside?
did you think it was kind of scary. I think that first march, well, kind of like young people, young people don't have this whole sense of fear. I think that one of the things when you talk about the paddy wagon and the fear of the paddy wagon, I don't know that I developed a fear of the paddy wagon until on one of those long hot marches, I got hit across my back and sitting in the paddy wagon because it was steaming hot, and I had dropped something that I was fanning with on the ground, and so I didn't have a sense that if I got down out of the paddy wagon to pick it up, that I was going to get hit across my back. But I got hit across my back, and I think after having been hit, and actually even and also doing that hot summer with a lot of the other violence that was going on, the fear of what could happen began to become very real, that something very terrible could happen in the paddy wagon, something very real could happen in the jail, something terrible could happen at the fairground. But initially there was not a sense of fear. I think the very first day that I was thrown into the paddy wagon, the very first day that for many of us, the very first day that we marched, it was excitement of doing something, you know. So the concept of fear was not very real then, you know, that first initial act of protest.
One of the articles that I brought that you can look at is the morning paper of the Clarion Ledger, showing them measuring at the home of Medgar Evers. How many of you have been to Medgar Evers' home? Great. Some of the rest of you should visit. And that was the first time I felt fear. Because if they could shoot and kill him in his driveway at night, then none of us were safe. But it was the kind of fear that didn't paralyze me, but it was a fear that really propelled me to want to do more.
So in closing, one thing I want you all to understand in linking this generation of youth activists to the ones that you will see at 2:30 is we have young people who are organizing around issues, as Ms. Johnson has said, education, quality education as a constitutional right. We have young people right here in Jackson who are organizing around mass incarceration. We have young people here in Jackson, Mississippi who are organizing around workers' rights. If you're familiar with what's going on at the Nissan plant in Canton, we have young people who are organizing around what's going on with voter rights. So you all have just as much power to be inspired by these stories, but we also want to put before you some young people who are the contemporaries doing the work now. So if you know who my mother is, you know that I'm also a teacher. So before we leave, if you would repeat after me. Our lives begin to end.
Our lives begin to end.
The day we become silent.
The day we become silent.
About things that matter.
About things that matter.
So if you would join me again in thanking Ms. Frankie Adams Johnson and Reverend Harrington, and And we hope that you all will come back for our panel at 2:30 to join our contemporaries in discussing youth activism in the 21st century.